We're moving on in the Rambam's list of the 613 mitzvahs. For the past 3 days, we learned the 248 mitzvot aseh, positive commandments. And for the next 3 days, we're going to be learning the longer list of the 365 mitzvot lot aseh, negative commandments. So while in the last 3 days we did about 82, 83 mitzvahs per day, today we're going to be doing 122. And so for the next few days as well. So we got a lot to do. Let's get right to it. Mitzvot lo ta'aseh, says the Rambam, the negative commandments. Aleph, mitzvah rishona. The first mitzvah, mi mitzvot lo ta'aseh, of the negative commandments is shelo la'alot b'machshava sheyesh sham elokah zulati Hashem. We shouldn't even entertain the thought that there's another God besides for Hashem, shene'emar, as it says in the second of the 10 commandments, lo yeh lecha elokim acherim al panai. You should not have any other gods on my face, which means before me. In other words, outside of Hashem's existence, there should be no other God. Here too, the Rambam calls the mitzvah the first, mitzvah rishona, because it's the most important, and also because it's the first in a series. It's supposed to lead us to fulfilling the commandments that we're about to learn about now, all the commandments, all the negative commandments connected with avodah zarah, which is what we go into right now, a multitude, a whole bunch of mitzvot related to avodah zarah. Bet, shelo la'asot pesel, not to make a statue. And this is the sin of making idols for yourself. Lo ya'aseh biyado, you shouldn't make it by your hand. V'lo ya'asu lo achirim, neither should others make it for you. But the idea is, this is a prohibition against making an idol for yourself. Shene'emar lo ta'aseh lecha pesel. You should not make for yourself a statue. Gimel is another mitzvah. Shelo la'asot avodat kochavim afilu la'achirim. You should not make another idol for somebody else. You should not make for yourself gods of molten metal, even for somebody else. Dalet, there's another prohibition, not to make images, even for beauty, even if you're not planning on serving them. Hashem says you should not make with me, which means you should not make images of anything which is together with Hashem in the sky. Hey, shelo lihishtachavot la'avodat kochavim, not to bow to any idol. Even if this particular idol is not meant to be served by bowing down. Some idols had very specific ways of serving them. But bowing is a universal prohibition that applies to every idol, even if it's not meant to be served that way. Do not bow down to them. Vav. Number 6, you're also not supposed to serve idols in the ways that are specific to it. As it says, you should not serve them meaning in their unique way. The Rambam in the actual laws will give examples. There was one idol called Markulis, whose way of serving was to throw stones at it. Another one was Baal Peor, where you would go to the bathroom in front of it, etc. These are special prohibitions that apply not to serve the idol in its unique way. Zion. More prohibitions connected to idol worship. Not to give your son over to the idol known as Molech. You should not give over from your children to pass for the Molech. This was a special service where they would have priests that would carry a son or any one of their offspring through fire. And this was a way of dedication to the Molech god. Number 8, Chet, not to do the act of idol worship known as Ov. Shene'emar al tifnu al ha'ovot. Do not turn to the ovot. Rambam describes this as a type of magic where a person would speak in an undertone. It would appear as if a voice was coming from his armpit. A whole detail, as we'll see later on in this book. Tet, shelo la'asot ma'aseh yidoni. Not to do the act of idol worship known as yidoni. Shene'emar ve'ela yidonim. You should not turn to the yidonim. That's another way of serving, another way of sorcery, kind of a type of magic, whereby a person would put in a bird's bone into his mouth, and then it would appear as if the bone was talking and telling the future. Yud, number 10, shelo lifnot achar avodat kochavim. Not to turn. To turn means to take interest in idol worship. Shene'emar al tifnu el ha'elilim. Do not turn your attention to false gods. Number 11, shelo lahakim matzeva. Not to put up a pillar for purposes of idol worship. Shene'emar v'lo takim lecha matzeva. Do not put up a matzeva, which is a pillar. Yud bet, number 12, shelo liten even maskis. Not to cut out stones specifically for bowing down on them. Shene'emar ve'even maskis lo titnu ba'artzachem. You shall not put out in your land any stone meant for bowing. Yud Gimel. This is why, in fact, by the way, today, whenever we have stone floors, we don't bow on them in a shul. We always put a towel or something else to divide between us and the floor, so we don't bow down on the stone. Yud Gimel number 13. Shelo lita ilan b'mikdash. In the Bet HaMikdash, there should not be any trees planted. Do not plant for yourself a worship tree, any type of wood. This is because idol worshippers used to plant and used to serve certain trees. They also used to put their trees next to their idols. Yud Dalet, number 14. If you have somebody else who serves an idol, you should not swear. If you have to swear to them for, let's say, a money reason, you cannot use their idol in your oath. But neither if they have to make an oath to you, you cannot make them take an oath with the name of their idol. You should never mention the names of other gods, and also lo yishama al picha, it should not be heard from your mouth. That means through your instruction of telling the goy, let's say, to use his idol in his oath. Tetvav, not to missionize, not to convince Jews to serve idols. This is specifically one person influencing many people. It should not be heard on your mouth. This is an additional warning to the mediach, to the one who influences a group of Jews. There's another prohibition, Tetzayin, not to entice a specific individual Jew after idol worship. As it says about this mesis, about this person that convinces, they should not do any more like this person. And this mesit, if you entice somebody to serve idols, it's extremely severe. And the Torah goes to great length to talk about how to punish you. There's a number of mitzvot, a number of prohibitions associated with this mesit. Yud Zayin, Shalola Ehov mesit, not to love the mesit, even though typically you're supposed to love a Jew. Mesit gets no love. Shenemar lo toveh lo, do not show desire or love to him. Yudchet, Shlola Azov Hasin Ala mesit, not to let go of your hatred for the mesit. Shenemar v'lo tishama elav, v'lo tishma elav, you should not listen to him. That means you should not in any way, shape, or form let your hatred go down. Yutet, 19, Shlola Hatzila mesit, ela omed al damo. If you see a person that enticed another Jew dying, you should not save him, rather stand by while he dies. Shenemar lo tachos in chalav, do not show any mercy to him. Chaf, Shelo yilamed hamusat zuchut al hamisit, the person who was convinced by the mesit. Later on, if they come to court, he should not say anything good about him in court. Shenemar lo tachmol, have no mercy on him. Chaf Aleph, 21, Shelo yishtok hamusat milamed chova al mesit, neither should you be quiet from saying something that will make him guilty, something incriminating against the mesit. Im yedalo chova, assuming that you know something that will make him incriminated or guilty. Shenemar v'lo tachaseh alav, do not cover him up. Chavbet, shelo lehanot b'tzipui ne'evad ba'avodat kochavim. If you have an idol that was worshipped, and on this idol was ornaments, let's say a necklace or a decorative piece, and that falls off, you cannot have any benefit from that object. Shenemar lo tachmod kesef v'zahav alehem. Do not desire any of the silver or gold that was on the idol. 23. Shelo livnot ir hanidachat kemo shehaita. We're going to see that if a madiach, a person who influenced many Jews, was successful, and he influenced an entire city, and the city was then discovered, they become what's called an ir hanidachat, a convinced city, and they have a special law where you have to completely destroy them and never rebuild that city. So the mitzvah here is not to rebuild an ir hanidachat the way it ever was. Shene'amar lo tibaneh od, it should never be rebuilt again. Chaf Dalet, shelo lehanot b'mamon ir hanidachat. You're not allowed to have any pleasure, any benefit from property of an ir hanidachat. Shene'amar v'lo yidbak biyadcha, nothing should stick to your hand from the city. Chaf Hei, shelo lehanot ba'avodat kochavim, not to have any pleasure from any idols, false gods. Bechol meshamshea uvitikrovet shela, those that serve it, anything that was offered to it, ubayayin shenitnasechla, and any wine that was poured to the idol. Shene'amar v'lo tavi to'eva el beitecha, do not bring any abomination into your house. From here we have the law that wine that was touched by an idol worshiper cannot be used. And from there we have many common laws today related to wine and goyim, as we know. Chavav, 26. Shelo lehitnabeh bishma, more mitzvahs connected with idol worship. Not to be a prophet in the name of an idol. Shene'amar v'asher yedaber b'shem elokim achirim, if somebody speaks in the name of false gods, other gods, there's a law that prohibits them from doing that. Chav zayin, shelo lehitnabeh b'sheker, not to say prophecy even in God's name if it's false. Shene'amar asher yazid ledaber davar bishmi et asher lo tzivitiv, if anybody purposely speaks something in my name, says Hashem, and I didn't command him, you should kill him. It's prohibited. Chavchet, 28. Shelo lishmoa lamitnabeh l'shem avad kochavim. If somebody does transgress that avera, and he prophesies in the name of an idol worship, of an idol, you should not listen to him. Shene'emar lo tishma el divrei hanavi. Do not listen to this prophet. Chavtet. Shelo yimana meharigat nevi hasheker v'lo dirai mimenu. Do not hold yourself back from killing a false prophet. Don't be afraid of him. Shene'emar v'lo tagur mimenu. Don't fear him. Lamed. Shelo lalechet b'chokot ovdei kochavim v'lo b'menhagotam. Do not follow their laws of idol worshippers or their customs. We're going to see a couple of details about this, but in general, you shouldn't follow goyish ways. Shene'emar v'lo tilchu b'chokot v'goyimir. Do not go in the laws of the goyim. Lamed aleph. Shelo liksom. Not to perform sorcery or black magic. It should not be found amongst you a person who does black magic. Lamed bet, not to practice divination. Divination is specifically related to times. You say certain times are lucky for this, times are unlucky for that. Do not use times as an indicator for how to act. By the way, included in this is also a prohibition against performing illusions, as we're going to see when we study the laws of Avodah Zarah. Lamed Gimel 33, not to perform superstition. This is telling future events based on something which happened to you. You passed by a certain animal, it's a sign of bad luck. You were eating bread and it fell out of your mouth, sign of bad luck. Those are included in Linachesh. Shene'emar lo tenachashu, do not perform superstition. Lamed daled, shelo lechashef, not to perform another type of magic. Shene'emar lo yimatzei becha mechashef, you should not find amongst yourself a person that practices this kind of magic. Lamed hey, shelo lachavor chaver, not to perform charms. This is the idea of you have a wild animal or a snake and you say certain incantations over it so that it calms down. You're not allowed to do that. Shene'emar v'chaver chaver, a person who does charms is prohibited. Lamed Vav, shelo lish'ol be'ov, not to inquire an ov. Earlier in the list of mitzvahs, by number 8, we had not to practice ov. Now we're talking about don't go to them for advice. Shene'emar v'sho'el ov is also prohibited to ask an ov for advice. Same thing, Lamed Zayin 37, shelo lish'ol b'yidoni, not to ask the advice of a yidoni, which we prohibited in number 9, to practice the yidoni. Here we're saying don't ask from them advice. Shene'emar v'sho'el ov v'yidoni, a person who asks of an ov or a yidoni is prohibited. Lamed Chet, shelo lish'ol b'chalom min hamitim, do not inquire in a dream from the dead. Do not bring dead spirits back up to life. This is called necromancing. Shene'emar v'doresh al hamitim. A person who inquires or communicates with the dead is prohibited. Lametet, and here we have the Rambam's unique opinion that many of the prohibitions that follow are related to Avodah Zarah. Shalot ha'adeh isha adi ish. A woman should not wear man's clothes. Shene'emar lo yech li gever al isha. The clothes of a man should not be on a woman. Mem shalo ya'adeh ish adi isha. A man should not wear a woman's clothes. Shene'emar lo yilbash gever simlat isha. A man should not wear the clothing of a woman. And here the Rambam gives the reason, not because of tzniut like we might think, rather mipnei shezeu minhag of kochavim. This was the custom of idol worshippers. And so it's clear in their books about serving idols is cross-dressing. So it's not allowed. Mem Aleph, shelo lichtov baguf k'ovdei kochavim, not to tattoo into our bodies like idol worshippers. Shene'emar uchtovet ka'aka lo titnu b'bsarchem, do not put tattoos into your body. Again, the Rambam understands this is part of idol worship. Mem Bet, shelo lilbosh shatnez, fascinatingly, not to wear a mix of wool and linen, k'moshe lovshin komrei avodat kochavim, like the priests of idol worshippers wear. We're accustomed to understand that shatnez is a chok, an irrational mitzvah. The Rambam says no, it's a way of idol worship to purposely wear wool and linen, and therefore we should not do it. Shene'emar lo tilbash shatnez. Mem gimel, shelo lahakif pa'at rosh, not to completely shave our temples such that we have no sideburns, no peot. Ke komrei avodat kochavim. Again, this was the practice of priests of idol worshippers. Shene'emar lo takifu pa'at roshchem, do not completely shave the temples, the sideburns of your head. Mem daled, shelo lahashchit kol hazakan, not to shave our entire beard in a destructive manner. Ke'ovdei kochavim, like goyim do, idol worshippers do. Shene'emar v'lo tashchit et pa'at zekanecha, do not destroy the side locks of your beard. Mem Hey 45, shaloli hidgoded ke'ovdei kochavim, not to gash ourselves, to cut into our bodies like idol worshippers do. Shene'emar lo titgodedu, do not scratch yourself. Ugedida usrita achati. The Rambam over here is indicating that there's 2 verses that describe the same act. One says lo titgodedu, do not gash yourself. And one says, V'seret lanefesh lo titnu b'bsarchem, do not put a scratch into your bodies. The Rambam is telling us those 2 are not 2 separate commandments. They're both the same thing. Gdida and srita, those 2 expressions of gashing and cutting are one and the same. Memvav. And it seems like the Rambam over here is moving on to mitzvahs that are not directly idol worship, but could lead you to negative behavior that would ultimately come to serving the wrong gods. For example, number 46, Shelo lishkon be'eretz Mitzrayim le'olam, never to live in Egypt. Shene'emar lo tosifun lashuv b'derech hazeh od, do not ever return on this path to Mitzrayim. It's famous that the Rambam himself lived in Egypt, and during that time he would sign letters as Moshe ben Maimon, who transgresses commandments of Hashem every day by living in Egypt, because it's actually a prohibition. Today, it's already understood to be a little different, even though circumstances don't really allow for great living quarters for a Jew in Egypt, but nevertheless, most commentators are of the opinion today that one who lives there does not transgress that commandment. Mem Zayin, 47, not to simply follow the thoughts of our heart and the lusts, the sight of our eyes. Again, here it's not clear in the Torah that it's about idol worship, but the idea is that if you follow everything you want, ultimately you're going to go astray, not to keep the Torah and mitzvahs. Mem Chet, when you come into Israel, we should not make any pact, any treaty with the 7 famous nations who lived there. Rather, memtet, not to leave anybody alive from these 7 nations. Leave nobody alive. And the idea is there should be no goyim that are influential left in Eretz Yisrael. Actually, in fact, the mitzvah is not necessarily to kill them all. We offer them a chance to make peace, but if they don't, then we have to kill them. Number 50. Nun, shalol achon of the kochavim. Not to show favor to goyim, idol worshippers. Shenemar lo techanem. The Rambam interprets this to mean not to give them living quarters, permanent living quarters in Israel, and also not to offer them compliments. Don't say how chen, how full of charm they are. Nun Aleph, 51. Shalolo hoshiv of de kochavim ba'artzenu. Not to allow worshippers of idols to dwell in our land. Shenemar lo yeshvu ba'artzachem. This is related to the previous prohibition of lo techanem. Nun bet. Shalolo hitchaten of the kochavim, not to marry goyim, shene'amar lo titchaten bam. And the idea, the verse continues to say, is that because the goyish spouse will bring you to follow the goyish ways. Nun Gimel 53, shelo yisa Amoni uMoavi bat Yisrael leolam. Any man from the nations of Ammon and Moab who mistreated the Jewish people, even if the man converts, cannot marry a Jewish woman ever. Shene'amar lo yavo Amoni uMoavi bikal Hashem, and Amoni uMoavi, written in the masculine form. So the male of those nations cannot come into the community of God. In fact, if a woman Ammoni or Moavi converts, the halacha is that she is allowed to marry a Jewish person. Nun Daled, 54. Shelo laharchik zera Esav min hakahal, ela ad shlosha dorot. Whereas Ammoni or Moavi, in the last mitzvah, can never marry into the congregation, descendants of Esav, this is called the Edomim, if they convert, we don't let them marry right away, but we shouldn't distance them only for 3 generations. Don't totally push away the Edomites. Rather, let them marry into the congregation after 3 generations. Nun Hey, 55. Same thing with the Mitzri. A Mitzri, an Egyptian who converts, you only keep him away for 3 generations. Don't fully throw away the Egyptian. Nun Vav. Shalom likro shalom la'amon u'mo'av b'tchila b'shat ha'milchama kish'ar amim. I said before that other nations always have the chance of peace. We come into Israel, we first offer them peace, then we destroy them. When it comes to Ammon and Moab, because they mistreated the Jews, we give them no chance for peace when we make war with them. Shene'amar lo tidrosh shlomam v'tovatam. Do not inquire their peace or their goodwill, their well-being. Nun Zayin, 57, shlo lahashchit yilnei ma'achal, talking about war. So we go into some mitzvahs of war. Not to destroy any fruit-bearing trees, and also anything which is considered destructive, asur is forbidden. This is the famous avera of bal tashchit, shene'amar lo tashchit et etzah, do not destroy the trees when you go to war. Nun chet, more mitzvahs about war. Shelo yir'u anshe milchama. Any people who are fighting in war should not be afraid, v'lo yifchadu me'oivehem, and not to be in awe of their enemies, b'shat milchama, during the war. Shene'amar lo tarot mipnehem, lo tiraum. Do not tremble before them, don't be afraid. Nun tet, shlo lanasir milibenu ma'aseh harash ha'asalanu Amalek. Amalek, we should never forget from our hearts the bad things that he did. Shene'amar lo tishkach, and always remember, it's one of the positive mitzvahs, as well as we saw yesterday. Samech, number 60, Sha'anu muzharin al birkat Hashem. Now we're moving on to something that's similar to idol worship. Not exactly idol worship, not even things that will lead to idol worship, but actually things that desecrate Hashem. Chilul Hashem. So first of all, I'm not allowed to curse. Birkat Hashem is blessing, but it's a euphemism. It means cursing Hashem. Shene'amar Elohim lo tekalel, that you should not curse God. However, the Rambam needs to explain something, because technically, we use this verse, and we're going to see it later, to not curse a judge. Elohim over here means authority. You should not curse authority, a higher judge. But over here, the Rambam says, I also can learn out that it's a prohibition against cursing God. How do I know? Because it says in a verse about punishment, if you choose to publicize God's name in your curse, You shall die. The ze'aklal, and the rule is, kol she'anash hakatuv alav karet o mitat bedin. Anytime we find in the Torah a punishment of death or karet, which means a premature death by the hands of God, harizu mitzvat lo ta'aseh, it goes into the category of a separate negative commandment, chutz mimila upesach, except for the commandment of brit and the commandment of bringing a Passover sacrifice, shehen bekaret vehen mitzvot aseh. They are the only ones that are positive commandments which are punishable by karet. Otherwise, if we find in the Torah somebody has to die, even if it doesn't say clearly that you're not allowed to do what they did, it means you're not allowed to do that. So since we find a verse that says clearly that you cannot, that if you curse Hashem, you die, that means we can infer from that there's actually a prohibition against cursing Hashem. And the Rambam says that's hinted in the words Elokim lo tekalel, not to curse God. Samech Aleph 61. Shalola avor al shvuat bitui. If you take an oath, that's called an oath of expression, which means you made an oath to do something or not to do something voluntary. You're not allowed to transgress it. Do not use my name to swear for falsehood. Not to swear in vain. Swearing in vain means taking an oath about something that's super obvious, that it is that way, or something obvious that it's not that way. It's pointless. It's a pointless oath. Or the Rambam also says included in this is the prohibition against making an oath not to do a mitzvah. These are oaths that are not about doing something or not doing something voluntary. They're simply oaths about facts and incontrovertible facts, therefore making it a shvuat shav, a pointless oath. Shneimar, this is the Ten Commandments, the third of the Ten Commandments, lo tisa et shem Hashem lekach al hashav, do not raise the name of your God in vain. Samech Gimel 63, shlo lechalel et shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to desecrate Hashem's name in public by not doing his mitzvahs when told to in public. Shneimar v'lo techalalu et shem kodshi, do not desecrate my holy name. Samech Dalet 64, shlo lenasot et dvar Hashem, not to test God's word. Shneimar lo tenasut Hashem elokechem, you have a prophet comes tells you something in the name of God, don't test him too much, just follow the words. Samech Shalol abed bet hamikdash or batei knesiot or batei midrashot. These are all related to Chilul Hashem. Not to destroy the bet hamikdash, shuls or study halls. V'chein ein mochakin et hashemot hamukdashim. We also should not erase holy names of Hashem. Ve'ein ma'abdim kitvei hakodesh, or destroy holy books, holy works. Shene'emar abed ta'abdun lo ta'asun ken Hashem elokechem. There's an instruction that you have to destroy all houses of idol worship, as we learned yesterday, and all idols. However, the verse immediately then says, do not do that to Hashem, which means that there's a prohibition against destroying holy things, holy places, holy names. Samech Vav, shelo yalin hatzaluv al ha'etz. Here we have what seems to be a random prohibition. And it's when a person was put to death by the court, they had to also be hanged for the remainder of the day. And then before sunset, they were taken off. Lo yalin hatzaluv. Somebody who's hanging should not be left overnight on the tree. I think that the Rambam puts it here because it also relates to Chilul Hashem. The reason that the Torah gives for not letting a body hang overnight is because Kilalat Elokim Talui. It's like hanging Hashem. Since a person was created B'Tselem Elokim, it's almost an embarrassment to God to leave this body hanging. So it could very well be, that's why the Rambam included it in his order over here. And now we move to mitzvahs related to the Bet HaMikdash. Samech Zayin, 67. Shlo lehashbit shmira saviv lamikdash. There was a positive commandment to have guards all around the Bet HaMikdash, and there's a negative commandment, same thing, in other words, not to stop the guarding around the Bet HaMikdash all night. Shene'amar ushmartem et mishmarti. This verse actually is not talking about the Bet HaMikdash, it's talking about arayot, immoral relations. So some commentators want to exchange the verse and put ushmartem et mishmeret hakodesh, to guard the guardian of the holiness, which is talking about the guarding of the Bet HaMikdash. Samechet 68, lo yikanes kohen lahechal b'chol et. A kohen is not allowed to go just randomly into the inner section of the Bet HaMikdash. Shene'emar v'al yavo b'chol et el hakodesh. Do not come in at all times into the holiness. Samechet shlo yikanes kohen balmum min hamizbeach v'lifnim. If a kohen has a physical blemish, he's not allowed to go past the mizbeach or inwards. Shene'emar ach el haparochet lo yavo. He should not come to the curtain, which is interpreted to mean anywhere past the Mizbeach. Ayin, number 70. Shalo ya'avod balmum. A Kohen who has a blemish should not serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Shene'emar asher yeh balmum. If you have a blemish, no serving. Ayin aleph. Shalo ya'avod balmum over. Even if you have a blemish that is going to go away, it's going to heal soon, it's passing, you still can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Shene'emar kol isha asher balmum. Any man who has a blemish, even if it's just passing, lo yikrav, should not sacrifice. Ayin Bet 72. Shalo yitasku haLeviyim ba'avodat haKohanim v'lo haKohanim ba'avodat haLeviyim. There's roles. The Leviyim have a job, the Kohanim have a job. They cannot mix. Shene'emar ba'Leviyim. It says by the Leviyim, al klei hakodesh v'lamizbeach lo yikravu. They should not come close to the holy vessels and to the Mizbeach. Gam heim, gam atem. And then the verse says, also them, also you, which means also the Kohanim shouldn't come to do the work of the Leviyim. Ayin Gimel 73, shelo yikanes lamikdash v'lo yoreh b'torah shtu yayin. You're not allowed to go into the temple. You're also not allowed to teach Torah, to rule on Jewish law, when you're drunk. Shene'emar yayin v'shechar al tesht. You should not drink wine or any intoxicating beverage. Bevoachem el ohel moed, when you come into the temple. And also v'ne'emar ulehorot et b'nei Yisrael. It also says you're not allowed to drink wine when you come to rule, to teach halachic laws to Israel. Ayin Dalid, Shalo Ya'avod Hazar b'mikdash. A person who is a non-Kohen cannot serve in the temple. Shne'amar v'zar lo yikrav alechem. A stranger should not come close to you. Ayin Hey, Shalo Ya'avod Kohen Tameh. If a Kohen is impure, he cannot serve in the temple. Shne'amar v'yinazru mikochei b'nei Yisrael. They should stay away from the holiness, the sacrifices of the Jewish people. Ayin Vav, Shalo Ya'avod Kohen Tuvul Yom ad sheyariv shimsho. A Kohen who is a Tuvul Yom, he cannot serve in the temple until the sun sets. What is a Tavul Yom? We mentioned in the list of positive mitzvahs that the only way to become pure from a ritual impurity is by dipping in a mikvah. However, dipping in a mikvah doesn't necessarily make you pure on every level. It makes you pure on an initial level. However, even after you go to mikvah, you're called a Tavul Yom, having gone to mikvah by day. That's literal translation. Tavul Yom, you went to mikvah by day. And when you went to mikvah by day, now you have to wait till the sun sets. Once the sun sets during that day, now you're fully pure on the next level. There's even a higher level where sometimes you got to bring a sacrifice, but typically after you're a Tavul Yom, Ya'ariv Shimsho, your sun sets, now you're fully pure. So here the Rambam is saying that if a Kohen was impure and he went to mikvah at 10 o'clock in the morning, even though he was in the mikvah, he's still a Tavul Yom and he cannot serve in the temple ad sheyariv shimsho till his sun sets. Shene'emar v'lo yechalel, you cannot desecrate the avoda. Ayin Zayin 77, shalo yikanes kohen tamei la'azara. A Kohen who is tamei, forget serving, he cannot come into the holy courtyard. Shene'emar v'lo yitamut machanehem, they cannot impurify the camp. Zu machanei shechina, that means the holy camp of the Shekhinah, the inner part of the Beit HaMikdash, the Azara, they cannot go inside. Ayin Chet 78. Shalo yikanes tamei lamachanei leviyah. If you are tamei, if you are impure on a certain level, you cannot come in to the Levite camp. In the desert, there was 3 camps. There was the Shekhinah camp where the Mishkan was. Then there was the Leviah camp where the Levite families camped right around it. And then there was the Machanei Yisrael, the Jewish camp. When we talk about the temple in Jerusalem, we also have 3 sections. Machanei Shekhinah is the innermost section of the Beit HaMikdash. Machanei Leviah is the rest of Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount. And then Machanei Yisrael would be Yerushalayim. So the Rambam first words it in terms of the Torah. A tamei person cannot come into the Levite camp. Shekenegdo ledorot, the corresponding area for all generations would be Har HaBayit, Temple Mount. You can't come into the Temple Mount if you are impure. Shene'emar le'avol tocha machaneh, he cannot come into the camp. Zu machaneh leviyah, this is the Levite camp. Ayin Tet 79. Shelo livnot avnei mizbeach gazit. The stones of the Mizbeach cannot be hewn, they cannot be cut to size. Shene'emar lo tibnei et hen gazit, you cannot build them cut to size. Pei, shelo lifsoa al Mizbeach, not to take wide steps on the Mizbeach, rather it has to be a ramp. Shene'emar v'lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al Mizbechi, do not go up with steps to my Mizbeach. Pei Aleph, shelo lehaktir. Not to bring any sacrifices on the innermost mizbeach. There was 2 mizbeachs in the temple, one on the inside, one on the outside. The inner one should not be used for sacrifices. Do not bring upon it strange incense. Pebet 82. Never put out the fire on the mizbeach. There should be a constant fire on the mizbeach. Do not put it out. Pei Gimel, also related to the Beit HaMikdash. There was a special oil of anointment used for Kohen Gadol and for kings. You cannot repeat that recipe for yourself. Do not replicate the formula, the recipe. Pei Daled, a stranger cannot put on himself the oil of anointment. It should not be anointed, put on any person's flesh. Pei Hey 85. Do not make the recipe of the ketoret for yourself. Shene'emaruv matkunta lo tasu. You cannot make the recipe, the formula of the ketoret. Peivav shlo lehotzi badei ha'aron. The staves, the poles of the Aron HaKodesh, the holy ark, should never be taken out. Shene'emar lo yasuru mimenu. They should not move from it. Peizayin 87. Shlo yizach ha'choshen me'al ha'ephod. Part of the Kohen Gadol's high priest's clothing was a choshen, the breastplate, and the ephod, the apron. And the choshen would clasp into the ephod. Once you do that, you cannot remove it one from the other. Shneimar v'lo yizach hachoshen mi'al ha'ephod. The choshen should not be removed from the ephod. Pechet shelo yikara ha'mi'il. The blue robe that the Kohen Gadol would wear as part of his clothes should never be ripped. Shneimar kefi tachra yiyalo lo yikarea. It should have an embroidered border and it should never be ripped. Peitet 89 shelo ha'alot kodashim b'chutz. Never sacrifice anything outside the holy temple. Shneimar yishamer lecha pentadalotecha. Guard yourself. Beware. Do not bring your olot, your burnt offerings, outside the temple. Tzadik shelo lishchot kodashim b'chutz. There's an additional law, not just sacrificing sacrifices, but not even to slaughter sacrifices outside. Shneimar ish asher yishchat shoro chesed el petach ol moed lo hevio v'nichrat. If a man just slaughters an ox or a sheep, doesn't bring it to the opening of the temple, he gets cut off. Tzadik aleph shelo lahakdish ba'alei mumin lemizbeach. Do not sanctify animals that have a mum to the mizbeach. Don't even declare it holy. If it has a blemish, you can't even declare it holy. Shneimar kol asher bo mum lo takrivu. If it has a blemish, do not sacrifice it. Takrivu, says the Rambam, zehu isur hakdesho. Even though the Torah's term is sacrifice it means a prohibition just against sanctifying it, consecrating it. Tzadik bet 92 shlo lishchot ba'alei mumin lashem korban. Not to slaughter animal with a blemish for the sake of a sacrifice. Shneimar lo takrivu ela laHashem. Again, it says the word lo takrivu, but it means slaughtering. Tzadik Gimel, shelo lizrok dam ba'alei mumin legabe mizbeach. Forget the slaughtering, you forget the sanctifying. There's a separate law. You're not allowed to sprinkle the blood of a blemished animal on the mizbeach. Shneimar be'ba'alei mumin. It says about the blemished animals, lo takrivu laHashem. It's a third verse, and that takrivu means the zehu isur is rikat damo. So we have three prohibitions: no sanctifying, no slaughtering, no sprinkling the blood, and a fourth one. Tzadik Dalit, shelo lahaktir emurei ba'alei mumin, not to offer on the mizbeach the sacrificial portions. That's the special limbs of the animal's insides that were supposed to go on a regular korban onto the mizbeach. If it's a blemished animal, it should not go. Shneimar v'isheh lo titnu mehem. Do not put any of them on the fire. Tzadik Hey 95 shelo lahakriv ba'al mum over. Just like when it came to a Kohen, whether he has a permanent blemish or even a passing blemish, he cannot serve in the temple. Same thing with blemished animals. Even if it's a Baal Mum Over, it has a passing blemish, you still can't bring it while it has that blemish. Shneimar, lo tizbach laHashem Elokecha shor vaseh asher yiyeh bo mum. Do not bring to your God any ox or any sheep that has a blemish. Zehu mum over, it's referring to a passing blemish. Tzadik Vav, shelo lehakriv ba'al mum miyad hakutim. Not to bring any blemished animal that's received from the kutim, or other versions have from the goyim. Shneimar miyad ben nechai lo takrivu. If you're getting a sacrifice from a strange Jew or from a goy, do not bring it on the mizbeach if it has a blemish. If it doesn't have a blemish, then sometimes we do take it. Tzadik Zayin 97 shlo yiten mum b'kodashim. Do not purposely put a blemish into any holy sacrifice. Shneimar mum lo yeh bo. You should not. There should be no mum in it. Klomar lo titen bo mum. The word yihye can be read as yehayeh. Do not make to be. In other words, do not put a blemish onto an animal. Tzadik chet shlo yaktir se'oro dvash. No leavened, no chametz, yeast, or honey can go into any sacrifice. We offer on the mizbeach. Shneimar ki kol se'or v'chol dvash lo taktiru. Do not bring any leaven or any honey onto the mizbeach. Tzadik tet 99 shlo lahakriv tafel. Not to bring anything that's unsalted on the mizbeach. Shneimar lo tashbit melach brit elokecha. Never cease, never stop to bring salt that has a covenant with Hashem. Hashem promised the salt that we brought with all korbanot. You cannot leave one korban without salt. Kuf, number 100. Shelo lahakriv etnan u'mechir. Not to bring two types of animals as a korban. Number one is the etnan. Etnan is a animal that was used as a fee to pay a zonah, a prostitute. And also mechir is any animal that was bought in exchange for a dog. Two special animals go into one prohibition. Shneimar lo tavi etnan zonah u'mechir kelev. Do not bring the harlot's fee or the dog exchange on the mizbeach. Kuf Aleph 101. Shelo lishchot oto ve'ed beno. Never shecht a animal and its son on the same day. Now, even though the Torah words it as male, the father and the son, actually the prohibition is the mother and its offspring. Shneimar oto ve'ed beno lo tishchatu b'yom echad. It and its son do not sacrifice, slaughter on one day. By the way, it's not only about sacrifices. Even when it comes to regular shchita, you're not allowed to shecht the mother and the son on the same day. Kuf bet shelo yiten shemen zayid b'minchat chotei. You're not allowed to put olive oil on the flour offering of a sinner. we learned that there's something called korban olev yored, the up and down sacrifice. In certain cases, the Torah allows to give your sacrifice based on what you can afford. If you're the richest, you bring an animal. Less rich, you bring birds. Even less rich, you bring a flour offering. In the case of a specific sin that requires this kind of korban, for example, going into the Beit HaMikdash when you're tameh, that's one of the examples. When you bring, let's say you're super poor, and you bring the flour offering, typically a flour offering would get oil and it would get livona, frankincense. Over here we have two special commandments. Shelo yiten shemen zayit b'minchat choteh. Do not put olive oil on the mincha, the flour offering of a sinner. Shneamar lo yasim aleh shemen. As well as shelo yiten aleh livona. That's kuf gimel number 103. Not to put on it frankincense. Shneamar lo yiten aleh livona. Kuf dalid shelo yiten shemen b'minchat sotah. Another mincha that doesn't get oil or frankincense is the mincha of a sota, a suspected adulteress, a woman who goes into seclusion with another man. After having been warned by her husband, do not go into seclusion with that man, she has to go through a whole test where she drinks bitter waters, and if she's guilty, then she explodes. If not, then she goes on to have even healthier children. But the bottom line is, she brings a korban mincha as part of her process, a flour offering, actually a barley flour, not of wheat flour. And this mincha does not have any oil. Shenemar v'lo yitzok alav shemen, do not pour in it oil. Kufhei 105 shelo yiten alav livona. She also doesn't get frankincense onto her flour offering. Shenemar v'lo yiten alav livona, do not put on it any livona. Kuvav shelo lehamir takodashim. You're not allowed to exchange korbanot. If you designated a cow or a sheep for a korban, you can't change it to another cow or sheep. Shenemar lo yachlifenu v'lo yamir oto, do not exchange it or substitute it. Kuv zayin shelo leshanot et takodashim lekorban lekorban. Even in one animal, if you told Hashem this animal is going to be a olah, a burnt offering, you can't switch it to a shlamim, to a peace offering. You can't change from one to another. Shenemar b'vchor. When it comes to the b'chor, the firstborn animal, it says lo yakdish ish oto. No man can make it holy. Now, what do you mean no man can make it? It's already holy. Klomar, the verse means to say shalo yakdishenu lo korban acher. You can't make it holy for another korban. It's a b'chor. It's got to stay a b'chor. Kufchet 108. Shalo lifdot b'chor behema torah. If you have an animal that was born firstborn, a kosher animal, you cannot redeem it. It must be sacrificed. Shenemar ach b'chor shor lo tifdeh. The firstborn of an ox cannot be redeemed. Kuftet, shalolim kor maaser behema, not to sell the maaser behema. Every year, you have to take all your animals, put them into a pen, and every 10th animal you bring as a sacrifice. So it's supposed to be a sacrifice. You cannot sell it for any other purpose. Shnamar lo yigael, it cannot be redeemed. Kuf yud, shalolim kor sadeh hacherem, field that was made into cherem. We learned the other day that there's two ways to make something holy. You can say it's hektish, which means sanctified, or you can say it's cherem, which means consecrated. If you say it's cherem, there's different laws. Sometimes it goes to Hashem, other times it goes to the Kohen. Regardless, you cannot sell it. Shenemar lo yimacher, it cannot be sold. Kuf yud aleph, shlo lifdot stei hacherem, it cannot be redeemed. If it has been dedicated as a cherem, shenemar lo yigael, lo yimacher. There's two expressions, lo yimacher, lo yigael. One means bought back to yourself, and one means sold to others. Kuf yud bet. Another law about korbanot. Shelo yavdil rosh chatat ha'of. If you bring a bird as a sin offering, unlike other types of bird offerings, where when you slaughtered it, you would separate the head from the body. When it comes to a chatat, you do not separate the head from the body. Shene'emaru malakat rosho mimul arpo. You have to do melika, which is a special way of slaughtering birds from the back of the neck. And the verse continues, v'lo yavdil. You cannot separate it. Kuf Yud Gimel 113. Shelo la'avod b'kodashim, not to do any physical work with sacrifices once they've been designated as a korban. You have to leave them. Don't do any work with them. Shenamar lo tavod b'vchor shorecha. Do not do work with the b'chor of your ox, the firstborn of your ox. Kuf Yud Daled shelo digzoz l'kodashim. You can also not shear them. You can't take the wool for yourself. Shenamar v'lo tagoz b'chor tzanecha. You cannot shear the firstborn of your sheep. Kuf Tedvav 115 shelo ishchot ha-pesach ve'chametz kayam. On Erev Pesach, you cannot slaughter the korban Pesach if you still have chametz in your house. Shenamar lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Do not slaughter the blood of my sacrifice on chametz while you still own chametz. Kuf Ted Zayin 116. We're continuing more mitzvahs related to the korban Pesach. Shelo lehaniach emurei ha-pesach ad she'yipasel belina. Do not leave any of the parts of the korban Pesach that were supposed to be offered unto the mizbeach. Do not leave them to the point that they're going to become disqualified overnight. Anytime you were supposed to bring something on the mizbeach and you would leave it overnight, it would become disqualified. So with a Pesach, you have to be very careful. Get everything on the mizbeach before. Don't let it stay overnight. Don't let it become disqualified. The fats of my holiday sacrifices that are supposed to go on the mizbeach, don't leave them overnight. Kuf Yud Zayin, the same thing applies. The meat of the korban Pesach, which every family was supposed to eat, don't leave over anything. Eat it quickly. Eat it fast. Make sure to eat it during the night. and not leave it till morning. There's a special prohibition not to allow the meat to stay over until morning. On the night of Pesach, besides for bringing the Korban Pesach, we also brought a second Korban called the Korban Chagiga, the holiday sacrifice. And there's the same mitzvah there. Kuf Yudchet, Shalol Hotir Mechagigat Arba'a Asar, not to leave over the meat of the holiday sacrifice of the 14th. But this time, unlike the Pesach, which only has one night, the Chagiga gets actually 2 nights. Layom Hashlishi. Don't leave it over to the 3rd day. Sheneinar v'lo yalin min habasar. Don't leave the meat to stay overnight. They learn from tradition. The verse is speaking about the meat not of the Korban Pesach, rather of the Korban Chagiga, the celebration sacrifice. And when it says don't leave it till morning, it doesn't mean till the next morning. It means libokro shel yom sheni shel yom Pesach. It means the second morning of Pesach, shehu shlishi l'shchita, the 3rd day after it was sacrificed. If it was sacrificed on the 14th of Nisan, don't leave it over to the morning of the 16th, 2 days later. Kuf Yotet 119. Shalol hotir mibsar Pesach sheni ad boker. We had that earlier in the list of the positive mitzvahs, that if you miss the first round of Pesach, 1 month later you have a chance to bring a Pesach sheni. And when you bring the Pesach sheni, you're also not allowed to leave over any of the meat to the next morning. Shneimar v'yashiru mimenu ad boker. Kufchaf 120. Shalol hotir mibsar hatoda ad boker. Anytime you bring a Thanksgiving offering for 4 special situations where you're required to bring a korban toda, when you bring it, you cannot leave the meat till the next morning. Shneimar v'lo tatiru mimenu ad boker. Don't leave the meat till the morning. V'hu hadin, and the same thing applies, even though the Torah only says it about toda, but it also applies to sh'ar kodashim, to all other sacrifices. She'in manichin otan la'achar zman achilatan. You cannot leave them after the time they're supposed to be eaten. Kuf Chaf Aleph, Shalol Yishbor Etzem BaPesach. More laws about the Pesach. You're not allowed to break any bones on the Korban Pesach. Shene'emar ve'etzem lo tishberu bo. No breaking bones. And the final mitzvah for today, Kuf Chaf Bet 122, Shalol Yishbor Etzem BaPesach Sheni. If you brought a Pesach Sheni the second time, 1 month after Pesach, you can't break bones in that offering either. Shene'emar ve'etzem lo tishberu bo. Do not break any bones in it.